didn't know if I'd make it. I had a bike, a bivvy instead of a tent, my phone, and a drone. I didn't really plan a route, I kind of just took it day by day, and as long as it was heading roughly in the direction of home.
Josh Reid is an ultra-endurance cyclist who blew up after riding his bike all the way home from China.
Seeing a country from the seat of a bicycle gives you a perspective that cannot be achieved in any other way. So I'm about to pay for the room, and then 2 more police cars rock up, like 10 policemen jump out with like bulletproof shields, guns and batons, jump into this hotel reception and then start like yelling at me in Chinese, and they put my bike in their van and start whisking me away. And then someone gets on the radio and says something in Chinese, but it's like, no, you can't stay there. So they take me back, and then it's another hour of like probing questions. If you've drank a bottle of Coke midway through an ultra when you're so broken, it's never tasted so good.
So Josh, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
It's hard to pin you down these days. You're obviously here, there, and everywhere with bikepacking trips, and we tried to record this a couple of times, but because you've been out in Morocco, of course, it was a bit difficult. But how was that trip?
So I did 2 trips out to Morocco. So I did one at the end of last year. It was more just like with friends, bikepacking trip, a bit more laid back, going to hotels and doing like 100, 200k a day, but like pretty relaxed. And then I've just come back from Morocco from the Atlas Mountain Race, which was a totally different experience where you're just riding constantly and having very little sleep and getting pretty ill. And then I travelled to and from that without flying. So I got public transport, ferries and trains across Spain to get to the start in Marrakesh and then back from the finish in Essaouira.
Was that like an eco thing, or was it just a challenge to try and get there without flying?
It was partly eco and then partly just to see if I could do it. And I had the time before and after, so I was just like, yeah, let's give it a go. And yeah, it was an interesting experience. It was difficult to get in on trains in Spain with a full sus mountain bike with TT bars on the front. They're not
Yeah, I
so
can
keen
imagine.
on letting you on the high speed trains.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I rode the South Downs Way with my friend about a year ago, and even just the mountain bikes was the first time I tried to take them on the train, and we remember speaking about how clunky it can be and challenging, but
Yeah,
yeah, good you managed to get it there in the end.
I always thought LNER were like really bad with getting bikes on trains. Having like been up to Scotland and they've got full carriages where you can put like 20 bikes on there. And then I was always like, LNER, they're terrible. But then going to Spain, it's like LNER is actually pretty good. It's not that difficult. Yeah, I know you've got to book them on, but it's still there's a dedicated space for them. Whereas in Spain, I'm taking the wheels off, both wheels off, putting them in bags, having to put the bike in a bag, then putting it in like a luggage space. And then Morocco's even worse. But like the trains are like really, really nice in Morocco, like made by the French and super like high class.
Oh well, so trade offs and difficulties, and actually you picked up on there like there is that difference, huge difference between bikepacking with your mates as a fun trip in Morocco versus when you're doing the racing there on the Giant, and that's something that I hope to touch on later on, because obviously you've done both and you've tried to exceed and push the boundaries in the racing side since doing it almost as a friendly thing. For the listeners that aren't aware, Josh basically made a video, I think the end of 2020, which was called something along the lines of a bivvy, a tent, and a drone, just cycling all the way back. And it's crazy that you had that idea to cycle all the way from China back to the UK, just riding all across all these countries, which I don't think many people's are like top list of where they go on holiday or where they travel to. So I think that's quite a unique experience that you're able to have. But before we talk about that, I really want to ground this in who you are as a person, and obviously the psychology behind what has led you to want to go and pursue this and have this adventure. And so the question I ask a lot of the guests that come on the podcast is firstly, who are you? How do you describe yourself? And then also if you could take it back to the childhood and what you were like then.
I don't know. I'm pretty adventurous, I'd say. I don't know. That's a difficult question. Like,
It is.
you can go down many different avenues. There's not really a direct answer to that. I've always liked riding my bike, and I've always liked being in the outdoors. And um, I was put on a bike from an early age and got into cycling, and I've kind of just kept that up. And now I'm pretty much trying to make a career in it and take it from there and just enjoy life, basically.
So what was it like when you first got into cycling? Like, how did you come across the sport, and what kept you cycling when you initially found it?
So my dad's always been like big in the like cycling industry and riding bikes. So he got me on a bike pretty early, and he took me to my first bike packing trip. Well, it wasn't called bike packing back then, but my first bike touring trip um, in Luxembourg when I was about 7. So that was the first one I did on my own bicycle, just touring around Luxembourg, and then did a few trips after that. We went to Iceland and did some bike packing and camping there, going to the center of Iceland to Lamalauga, and that was a really cool trip. And yeah, kind of just went from there. And after my A levels, and I didn't really know what to do, so I went out to Canada for 2 years and worked as a ski instructor in the winter, and then planted trees in northern British Columbia. So I had a bit of a break from the bike and didn't really do much over those 2 years, but was still in the outdoors and tree planting. I was camping every day, and you're basically living in a tent in the middle of nowhere in uh, top of BC, and planting 2 to 4 thousand trees in a day. And that's kind of how I made my money in those 2 years, because ski instructing makes no money at the level I was anyway. So that allowed me to then, after that, do some trips. So then I got a bike and did a first trip around Nova Scotia in the east coast of Canada. So that got me back into bike touring, and then it kind of gave me the bug again and made me want to do the trip home from China. So yeah, I went uh, traveling with friends in Southeast Asia, and I knew I wanted to cycle home because it was like sparked in my head from a talk I had with my godfather, and I took everything out with me on that trip that I needed to cycle home. So all my cycling kit, all my tools, panniers, pannier racks, helmet. So I was in 2 months around Southeast Asia with friends, looking like a turtle with this massive rucksack on my back, and then didn't really know where I was going to get a bike from. I was thinking maybe Cambodia or Vietnam, because like GT make bikes out there, but they're like smaller niche brands that have bikes coming off the product line, but they're not frequent. They're not like always coming off. They do batches. So it didn't really work out with anything like that. And then I was able to get in contact with Giant, and they told me to get to Shanghai, and the rest is history. Basically, did that trip and made a video that was just meant for me and my family, basically. And I enjoyed making the video myself. It was more just something for my memories, and then it kind of went viral on YouTube, and now from that video, I've thought that this is possible to make a career from it. So I had a bit of a break where I was a civil engineer and working for that for 2 years during COVID, because I got back from the China trip and COVID hit, and I was like, what do I do now? I can't be traveling by bike anymore. I'm kind of stuck. So got a job as a civil engineer and was going down that path for a bit, and then the China video kind of hit off, and yeah, quit that, and now I'm doing the cycling full time.
Yeah, it's great the amount of opportunities that can come from that, and it's interesting to hear how that story started so early on with being introduced to it with your dad, and it was always something that was almost part of your DNA, like going out and being on your bike and doing trips and stuff. What do you think in terms of like personality? Set you aside from kids who might have been, I think there's a level where kids have a tendency to try something and give up, or especially when things get pretty rough, especially camping and bike packing.
Mhm.
That can be uncomfortable, and there's that whole thing of type 2 fun. It's fun sometimes, you have the peaks and the lows and you get to experience all of that, but it's not everyone's kind of piece of cake. So I don't know if you've ever done any kind of self-reflection as to why you in particular like really came alive in that. And I don't know, what's your kind of whole like mindset on that? Like, how do you see those setbacks and challenges and rough times and still want to do it?
Um, I don't know. Like with the lows, you always, it's like peaks and troughs. When you have a low, you're gonna have a huge high like at some point. Um, so yeah, you could be sleeping in the dirt, but then you might have an incredible sunrise or an incredible sunset. So swings and roundabouts. You you got to do the sleep in the dirt to get the view at the top of the mountain.
And I suppose that reinforcement loop of having to do the hard work, having to do the challenging stuff to get the upside was reinforced quite early on. So I suppose that really kind of was like built in your mindset of like, oh yeah, I can overcome this challenge and get to that place.
And it always feels better. Like the most like supreme comfort is always feels way better when you've had like extreme discomfort. So when you've like lowered your expectations and your comfort zone, when you do go above that, then it's like wow, and that bar is then lower as well. So it's easier to get above that and experience some amazing moments.
Do you think we suffer with too much comfort in the West and particularly with the modern world?
I reckon so. I feel like also like when you're in the middle of nowhere and in these places with less comfort, like the kindness of strangers is way more. Like the places that you've been told in the West that you shouldn't go, and these places are dangerous. I found are the most kind and the most giving.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And just thinking about like the actual makeup of you as an athlete and as you are then approaching this. I mean, I was strolling back on Instagram to do a bit research for this, and I see you're not only doing the bike packing, but you're also getting like mixed in with like hill climb season and doing a bit of like bike racing and stuff. And do you find that there's a lot of crossover in terms of the training or the enjoyment you get from like the top end and the ultra endurance stuff?
I always like pushing myself, and even when I'm doing the ultra endurance stuff, I'll still be racing up a hill or within a race. Like just in the Atlas Mountain race, I was very ill for most of it. I like had a bit of a chest infection going into it, and then felt all right. Like when I flew out, when not flew out, when I traveled across by boat and train, and then we went up really high. Like the first 100k, you went up to 2,500 meters, and it was like going from 20 degrees in Marrakesh to -7 up at the top. So it was, and we're going. Bearing in mind, we started at like 6 p.m. and we got to the top at like 3 a.m. So it's really cold, and just like the dry cold and dust in that part of the world is just like really affects you. So a lot of people got ill, and I was coughing up blood, and like I was going downhill and hyperventilating, and then I was like sleeping in a bed in a hotel one night and just like shivering and hyperventilating, trying to get to sleep. So it was a real struggle to keep on going. But then in the last like 30 hours or something, I kind of got my breathing back, and then I just pushed on, and it was actually really enjoyable to push on up the final climbs. Well, final climbs is like the last 30 hours, so it's still a fair way to go. But yeah, I enjoy the racing side of it.
It honestly baffles me hearing that because I feel like I've done compared to like the average cyclist or even the average person. I feel like I've kind of done some of the pushing the limits of what's possible, and then I hear the story that even you've just said there, and it just massively puts it into context of what is possible with enough mindset and obviously with enough training as well to try
Mhm.
and have the drive and go out there. I mean, we may as well get just like crack into the big trip because I think there's quite a few takeaways and lessons and things I want to understand about that. Because would you say that's the most overall most challenging thing, or would you say it's because you were taking it as a more of a tour rather than a race, it was less demanding, like
Oh,
physically and
definitely less.
mentally?
You like I got full night's sleep, and I would stop in restaurants, and I'd stop to chat to people, and um, yeah, way more enjoyable and less less stressful. You just don't get as ill either, like when you're not pushing quite as hard and just being able to eat a bit better.
You say the inspiration came from just thinking about where you'd import a bike from, and then it's kind of a thing to
Mhm.
rather than importing it through shipping or through the plane, you just ride it yourself manually back from
Yeah.
China. When you were having dreaming up the idea and sort of planning it, where were you at in terms of the risk and the anxiety and the fear of doing something that is so beyond what you'd done before? And I know you mentioned that you were doing some trips and obviously you were already outgoing. Would you say that there was any anxiety or fear and apprehension ahead of the task ahead, or were you just excited for it?
Well, I knew roughly like the geopolitics of the areas that I was going through, but then I kind of just wing a lot of it. I didn't really plan a route. I kind of just took it day by day and decided where I was going to go that day. As long as it was heading roughly in the direction of home, then I just decided on the day. I wasn't always thinking about the end destination, which is you got to like take it day by day and break it down a bit. And then I'd told too many people as well, so I had to do it. I'd I couldn't back out and like just get a train home or a flight. Yeah, you're also just cycling through some incredible places, and I'd meet cycle tourists or people in cars or something go in the opposite direction, and they'd suggest different routes. So I took a massive detour, which I could have just gone straight through Kazakhstan and taken a flat route through the desert, which would have been very hot, but it would have been flat. But instead, I took a detour and did the Pamir Highway, which is like the second highest international highway in the world, which goes up to like 4,500 meters or something. So you're cycling 100 meters and then stopping and getting your breath back. But like that was like one of the best bits of my trip, and even though it was really tough at the time with the washboard and um, all the challenging terrain, it's kind of what sticks in my mind, and I've got some incredible photos of that time going. And that's also where I saw a lot of the cycle tourists on the trip, because people fly into Dushanbe and then do the Pamir Highway and then fly out of Osh. So people do round the world trips, but only do sections, and Pamir Highway is one of them. So I saw a lot of people doing what I was doing, but in the opposite direction. But yeah, it was like, and that's also where like the kindness of strangers was incredible. Like along the border of Afghanistan, it's the kindest place I've ever been. People also got food poisoning, but because people the food hygiene's not quite the same out there, and someone gave me some vegetable, well, what I thought was vegetable soup, and it turns out it had liver in it. And considering I was trying to keep a vegetarian diet whilst I was riding along, that played havoc with me. I was like sick all night, and it wasn't the most comfortable riding the next day. You just gotta take it day by day
Yeah,
and enjoy the moment, really.
yeah, and I think it's interesting. You obviously mentioned that you're not really forward planning. I suppose that would induce anxiety if you thought too
Mm,
much about the complexities of things. You've just got to trust yourself in the
yeah.
moment to make the right decision. And I suppose it was probably comforting as well seeing all the other riders, because as much as, and I'll ask you about this, about the being lonely and what it's like isolated
Mm,
like that, away from all the comforts of being with friends and family. But at least then you recognize that you're not the only one, and there are other people
yeah.
out here. And obviously in the video you make connections. And so from an isolation perspective, did you ever find yourself, I mean, I know it's a silly question to ask, did you miss home, but were there any times where you like negatively spiral because you're just in your own thoughts and no one to sort of bounce off of?
Oh, definitely. Like especially in China, when the common language is like there's basically no common language, so you're pretty much in your head all the time. Apart from the odd person who could speak English, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere where you don't see foreigners, so like people rush up to you and want to practice their English. But yeah, I said that I saw a lot of cyclists like along the Pamir Highway, but like that was a one off. Like apart from getting back into Europe, like the rest of it was very very sparse, and I didn't really see anyone. I think the whole of China, I maybe saw um, two or three cyclists the whole way across, and only when I was in Shanghai and then Xi'an, which is in the center of China, where the terracotta warriors are, where the Silk Road kind of started, and where I started following the Silk Road. And apart from those two places, and I didn't really see any Westerners. And especially when I went into Xinjiang, like the where all the Uyghur Muslim community is, like I didn't see any Westerners, and I was getting tailed by police cars and things. So um, yeah, a different experience. I'm not sure if I answered your question there. I kind of just waffled on.
No, it's really interesting to hear all of those unique details that you're kind of recalling now, even 2.5 years on. And
Mm.
you mentioned you'd tailed by policemen. Was what you were doing fully legal, or were you unsure about these things, and were you like worried when there were policemen, or was it like a? Because I remember on the video it was the Chinese people you said like took you out for dinner. The policemen, they've been really friendly.
Yeah.
But I
So
suppose is yeah.
it's like Xinjiang. You've got like military checkpoints like every 40 kilometers that even locals have to go through, and I'd go through these, and police would be very suspicious of me and like ask lots of questions. but then they'd also be friendly and give me grapes and things like that. But because their English wasn't very good, a lot of these conversations had to happen through Google Translate. So you could kind of get away with, if there was a probing question that you didn't really want to answer, you kind of just said you don't understand, and you'd kind of get away with not giving too much away. Like when I got my Chinese visa originally in Bangkok, I didn't mention that I was cycling across China. I basically just said I was going into China and then going to Bangkok, and not Bangkok, Beijing, Shanghai, and all the like tourist spots. And then when I got into China, you could just do what you want ish. You're technically meant to stay in a hotel every night, but I did sleep on the side of the road. And then going into Xinjiang, this one checkpoint, I went through and they decided that they wanted me to sleep in a hotel that night. They didn't trust me to go by myself, so this police car tailed me, and then eventually it stopped, and they asked if I was hungry, and I said yes, because I was, and because I'd just ridden all day, and so they stopped at the next restaurant, took me out for dinner, and basically walked into this restaurant. It must have looked like I was getting arrested or something to all these people in this restaurant. Sat down, like they ordered some noodles for me, and then basically just watched me eat these noodles really badly with chopsticks. And then they struggle to find like a hotel that I'm able to sleep in, because like there's no foreigners in this part of the world, and there's only certain um, hotels that foreigners can stay in. So there's eventually this hotel that they think that, yeah, you can stay in here. So I'm about to pay for the room, and these policemen have gone now. And then two more police cars rock up, and they like 10 policemen jump out with like bulletproof shields, guns, and batons, jump into this hotel reception, and then start like yelling at me in Chinese. And they put my bike in their van and start whisking me away. And then someone gets on the radio and says something in Chinese, but it's like, no, you can stay there. So they take me back, and then it's another hour of like probing questions. And then as long as I get out of there in the morning, then they were happy for me to stay there. But it's not until like 2 a.m. into like a hotel room, and I just want to shower and get to sleep. And yeah, it was kind of difficult and worrying at the time, but it's kind of funny afterwards that happened. And I suppose it's a good story.
Exactly what you've said there, I think, is the epitome of going and doing this sort of thing. Is that, yeah, you'll have the low moments. Of course, you'll have fantastic like memories from it, but you had in the back of your mind when you're planning the trip and you're going out there and having these experiences, is it's like, what's the worst that can happen? And even if the bad experience is and you'll just sort of muddle through it, it will be a good story to tell. And I think that's
Yeah,
what's so powerful about bike packing trips or adventure trips, or exactly what you've done almost to the nth degree. Is just that there's so many funny anecdotes that you can draw on now, and so many
mm,
memories that you can fondly look back on, especially with recording it. And one of the questions I wanted to ask was, you obviously made the YouTube video and you've got obviously recorded content off the back of it. One of the prefaces of the video is that you have a drone with you. I'm just thinking out loud here, like, how were you able to not only keep all of that equipment on you, but also have like the batteries and the
yeah.
storage and all this, like the logistics of actually documenting it all?
Well, I think I was very lucky in that hotel situation that they didn't actually check my bags, because there's lots of that's why there is so much skepticism of foreigners going into Xinjiang, is because foreigners have gone in there and used drones to film the concentration camps that are in that part of the world for the Uyghur Muslims. So yeah, I was probably very lucky that they didn't open my bags and find a drone in there. But basically, I was just filming everything on my phone. I had a GoPro, and then obviously the drone. It's quite an old model. I bought it in Shanghai when I was over in China, and then yeah, we'd put it up whenever I had a good shot that I thought would work well. There's one moment on a really straight road in China that almost hit a telephone wire, which could have been the end of the video. Um, but yeah, I was lucky I didn't hit that. And then going through Uzbekistan, drones are actually banned there, and like, if worst case, could lead to like a prison sentence. So I was very lucky that going through the border, they only checked 2 bags and didn't have the drone in. Um, so yeah, that could have been spanner in the works as well. But yeah, everything pretty much on the phone, and then the whole video is edited on the phone as well. So the whole 30-minute documentary is edited on the iPhone. I now edit on a computer, but I still now and again, like all the Atlas Mountain Race videos that I've put up recently, they're all edited on the phone because I was took me like a couple of weeks to get back from Morocco.
How long did the whole trip again take? Just for listeners'
Uh,
benefit.
Shanghai one, 4 months, 15
4 months.
thousand
So you got
kilometers.
four. If we're thinking like 4 months worth of content, how much raw content did you have compared to the final video?
Um, I don't know. I'm pretty good at not taking too much extra. Yeah, I'm pretty intentional with the shots I take, and most of it is used in the final edit.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I
There's
mean,
a lot,
that
I
was
mean,
very
there's a lot of
impressive.
shots for me, like going back and forward to get the camera when
Yeah,
I leave on the ground. So yeah, there is a lot of cut-offs of those parts.
I always think that whenever you see someone walking past a camera shot, obviously because I've done a few videos myself, I always think about just the
Hmm.
annoyance almost of going back and picking it up, especially if it's like a massive hill. You got to go
Yeah,
back down the hill with all your bike bags and then go back up it again. But it's
it's
um
kind of
it's
my
another one of
style of
those.
filmmaking now. It's like that's what I do. Like
But you can't do that with the racing though, can you? You're giving away time.
um, no, but I did do one shot in the Atlas Mountain Race because I was kind of ill, so I was just like, I'm not really racing anymore. I just want to get through it, and this is an amazing shot. This is what I'm going to be making. Like this is how I'm going to make a career from it. I need to get this shot, so I'm going to put the camera on the ground here and get this shot. So yes, I'm racing, but I also need to make content from it.
One of the things I wanted to ask, and again, it's another one of those questions you have when you're watching the video is, I mean, I've written down here that through Azerbaijan it only took a few days, but you were fueled by pomegranates, shots of iced tea, and spoonfuls of sugar. And
Yeah,
on the trips that I've done in the UK, I have access to corner stores and little village shops and even supermarkets for food and fueling. And I can't imagine, especially, did you say you were trying to stick to a vegetarian diet whilst you're out there?
yeah. Well, as vegan as
Yeah,
possible.
like, oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So in terms of that, were there any moments where you were really, I mean, struggling for fuel? Because at the end of the day, eating is literally your fuel, and the amount of mileage that you're doing is obviously burning a lot of calories. So
Yeah,
how did you manage to like not starve when you were in the middle of like these really barren like places in these countries?
yeah. China was amazing because you just got noodles and like the fruit in China was amazing. Like the best mangoes I've ever had. Like massive yellow mangoes and then durian and like some really good stuff and then watermelons. And then Uzbekistan had some really good like watermelon stalls and people offered like me a bed in one of these watermelon stalls. So I slept there one night and they gave me melon for dinner. Um, One country that was really difficult was Kazakhstan. I was basically living off bread and ketchup, and because they have a really meat-based diet in Kazakhstan. I was all right in Almaty, where it's like there's Georgian restaurants and different things, but as soon as you're out in the middle of nowhere, there's very little choice. Um, then as soon as I got across the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan and Georgia and then Turkey, Turkey was really good for food. Um, yeah, I was okay. I basically just ate on the side. Like there was always like a petrol station or somewhere to fuel up, or a corner shop, or something to get food. I was never really struggling that in that sense. There was one point in China where I had to ask for some water from some builders, like building a new highway, but and then actually yeah, in Kazakhstan I had to like hitchhike for water. So I like just held my bidon like out as if I was hitchhiking, and then people would chuck water out, and someone stopped and gave me some water. But um, other than that, I was all right.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing that I would personally worry about. And
Mm,
obviously, I asked you about the overall anxiety and fear, generally speaking, of doing something so literally foreign and unknown. But obviously, you answered, you just kind of take it day by day. And I suppose you got to do that with the eating as well. And it's just
mm,
whatever comes up, and
yeah,
you're obviously relying, as you said, on the kindness of strangers, which is something that
yeah.
potentially being in the West and being sheltered from this sort of thing, I suppose it was quite a nice surprise when you were out there.
I didn't carry any like cooking equipment or anything. I pretty much just ate out of restaurants because it was so cheap out in Central Asia and that part of the world. And then just ate cold food if I was camping somewhere and ate stuff that way.
Did you find like the food? Did you have any like gut issues, or were you struggling at any point with your overall sort of health? Because you mentioned obviously you compromise on sleep on a couple of occasions with awkward hotel dealings, but
Yeah.
when you're out in that environment, I can imagine your body's kind of confused sometimes, and your different foreign foods and stuff. So, but did you ever have any discomfort with health stuff?
I think I was pretty lucky. I only got food poisoning once, and it kind of only lasted a day. So I think I was pretty lucky in that department. I got very skinny in certain places like Kazakhstan, and then kind of by the end, my face. Well, looking back at the photos, like my face got very fat to what like coming back through Europe. I don't know whether my body's somehow suddenly got loads of extra nutrients that it wasn't getting previously in the trip, and then decided to like pile it all on to my face. But yeah, I think I was pretty lucky in the whole trip that I didn't get super ill at any point or have any like major issues.
I saw a tweet somewhere the other day that said something along the lines of when someone goes on holiday, this individual went on holiday. He was trying to go to the gym more and eating more, but felt he felt much better when he was on the holiday, and then when he
Yeah.
came back, doing the exact same stuff but eating more Western food and the Western environment of things, it just
Hmm.
wasn't as good. So I think there is definitely a case to be said for eating more like whole foods, like predominantly plant based foods, especially when you're out there and you're taking this food on board. I suppose it's probably almost mostly better maybe than maybe the West.
Yeah.
I suppose culturally very different. Did you have any like big preconceptions that were maybe dismissed when you went out there, and what were they if you did have some?
I don't know. I was I was very surprised with what Afghanistan was. Like I didn't cycle through it, but I cycled along the border for 400 kilometers. Um, and I was like all I've seen like growing up was the wars that were on there, like just desert wars, and cycling along it is basically just a huge mountain range and a river valley with like little villages set in green oases, like next to waterfalls and people waving from the other side of the river. But it's like it's also that part of the world is where all the heroin um, comes into Europe basically across that river. But yeah, all I saw was friendly people and um, cute little villages isolated in this mountain range.
Do you think your worldview has been changed off the back of experiencing that? Again, obviously coming into the podcast, I didn't know that you'd also been around quite a lot before that. Anyway, you weren't just in the UK. But do you think that it changed your perspective on life or of culture or anything like that?
But I feel like I know that the world is like it's not that big, and it's I could cycle across it. Yeah, it does take 4 months, so it's both small and big. Yeah, we're not that different from the other people like all the way across the world. Like we all need to do the same sort of stuff.
I think that's something which is so important to realize. And again, as most of the listeners, I imagine, haven't cycled halfway across the world, and I'd imagine most of the listeners have not really experienced the level of different cultures as you have. And so it's interesting to hear that you just it's pretty simple that people aren't that different from us. And I think we can often get too caught up in cultural divides or whether it's like religion or politics and things. But I
Mm,
suppose all of those barriers are broken down when you're just human to human asking for, where the next restaurant is, where you can get some
yeah,
water. And I think that's lovely about the connection. What did your friends and family think when you got back?
I definitely had a reaction when I got back, but I feel like there was more of a reaction when the video came out, and then like when people saw that, I think there was more of an understanding of what I actually did. And originally, like the first 2 months, it was like 2,000 people had seen it, and then I did an article for the Daily Mail, which kind of got the ball rolling, and like off the back of that, I had like 200,000 views. Um, so that a lot more people from who knew me would like contact me and like tell me they'd seen the video, and also a lot of people that I didn't know. But then you also get the Daily Mail readers who like you'd read the comments of this article that I did, and it says COVID super spreader and COVID patient zero, and all these sort of like typical Daily Mail reader comments, which is kind of funny to read. But it's also like the biggest one of the biggest readerships of any like online newspaper. So it's just good to get a positive cycling story in the Daily Mail. Um, and then kind of off the back of that, having 200,000 views, the YouTube algorithm kind of got the video, and then it's like it's gone from there. I think it's on like 3.3 million now, which is crazy to think. Like, imagine all of those people in like a football stadium, like watching a video that you did that you weren't expecting. You're expecting to be like 2 to 3 thousand people see it. It's
I
pretty
mean,
crazy.
it's like 50 football stadiums or something
Yeah.
ridiculous in terms of capacity. Did that surprise you? And have you like what's your reaction been as it's blown up? Have you had people reaching out and
Oh,
asking for inspiration or tips and things?
yeah, I get them all the time. I get people still messaging me now, saying they've seen the video and wanting to do something similar. Basically, everything that's happening now is still probably come off the back of that one video. So I'm very lucky that that's done as well as it has.
You could argue it's luck, but it's also a huge trip. And I suppose doing all
Mm,
of those trips and building that is something that you've put a lot of hard work into. And so it's nice to be, it's not something you'd anticipated or expected, but it's nice to be
mm,
rewarded for doing something like that, and not like in a personally gratifying way, but also in a way of just giving back, right? Because
yeah.
you're there now, your video's up there to have a positive view, as you said, in the mainstream media, which all too often can have a really negative view of cyclists, especially in the UK, but also then be an inspiration for those to get
Mm,
into it and for the cyclists. And obviously that's as a casual to intermediate guy who's done a bit of bike racing and a bit of bikepacking trips. It's
mhm,
so cool to see someone documenting it in such an honest way and such a raw way. Like there's no videography, there's no like huge like thousands and thousands of pound camera like filming it. It's just like you're talking to a camera, documenting your
yeah.
experiences, and I think there's a certain level of like relatability in that as well.
Mm. Well, that
Um,
video has changed my trajectory of what I'm like doing in life and the career I've gone down. If that video hadn't taken off, I'd still be working towards finishing my qualification as a civil engineer and going down that path, which would still be a very worthwhile career. But I've completely moved towards um, something I really enjoy and something I have a massive passion in.
as you've transitioned from purely doing it as a hobby to also doing it as work, has that changed your relationship with riding the bike or anything with regards to that? Because you hear stories about people where their passion turns into the job, and
Yeah.
then sometimes like professional cyclists even who then
Mhm.
say that they have a disconnect from the love of the sport. Has there ever anything like that for you, or have you just kept going?
I feel like I'm too early in the process to comment on that too much, but yeah, I only stopped the job at the end of last year, and then going into this year is kind of when things are starting to um, happen. So I feel like you need to ask me that question in a year or two.
Yeah, I'll get you back on if I'm still hopefully if I'm still doing the podcast. But
Yeah.
um, you say you got the job, and obviously you're riding a Giant across was the big trip, and you've
Mm.
been in relationship with Giant as a manufacturer since. So what's your current arrangement? Are you like sponsored by Giant? Have you got like on a team that helps with the applications for racing and stuff? Like what's the kind of stuff that you're doing now?
So I'm one of Giant's global ambassadors. So yeah, I'm very lucky and I get some pretty nice bikes to ride. But yeah, I've got a few companies that support me um, in my endeavors and that help me on what I want to do this year. So yeah, I'm pretty lucky in that respect.
And I want to talk about the recent racing you've done and the trips and things, because I think it's, as we mentioned at the beginning, it's a completely different ball game going from packing your bags and seeing where life will take you compared
Mm.
with you're on the start line against lots of other guys who have been more than willing to sleep, absolutely like ruin their sleep cycles. And the
Mm.
first time I came across this was, I don't know if I imagine you probably have actually. Have you heard of Duran Rider?
Yeah,
On the whole YouTube space from like years ago. And I remember following. There's a race called the Indy Pack,
yeah.
race across Australia, and you just see the tracking every day, and they're doing. Sorry,
Is that still going on?
I have no idea. I just
That's
remember seeing
cool.
videos on it years
That's
ago,
quite
and
quite a few unfortunate events have happened, haven't it? I think
yeah,
Mike
I mean,
Paul
actually,
was Indie Pack.
to ask at the back of that, was that ever something that you've considered as you're pursuing this now? Because that's how that was obviously. I remember that being quite a sad time for the sport. Is there something
Mm.
that with riding at night and pushing to the limits like that?
I did the Transcontinental last year. That was a very like road based ultra, and I've kind of transitioned into more doing the like off road ultra distance riding because on the road you've got to worry about traffic, and I feel like sleep deprivation and traffic do not mix. Whereas off road, if anything happens, it's kind of your fault because it's just because you've had not enough sleep and you've gone off the track. Whereas on the road, you don't know what the truck's doing behind you or the camper van or whatever. Like it's kind of out of your control a little bit. Whereas off road, it's all your fault. So like it's more of a controllable environment in that sense. And yeah, just being out of the way of traffic is like I found to be a better idea for ultra racing.
And so, why this transition to ultra racing as opposed to just bikepacking trips? Like, what was the inspiration for like pinning a number on and
Yeah.
and uh, being willing to go days and weeks of sleep deprivation?
I like both. So I like the like ultra distance racing, but then I also like bike touring and having a more relaxed approach and stopping in restaurants and stopping to chat to people and getting good footage and just having a more enjoyable time. But then I also like the aspect of pushing yourself and seeing how far you can physically go. And like I grew up racing from like the youth of British cycling, like through junior, and that is like that part of it has come into this a little bit and made me want to do the racing side. I've not lost that competitive bug. Still feel like I need a bit of racing in my life.
Yeah, and it's such a different level of competitive bug. It's a physiological thing, but at the same time, it's not just you can do X number of watts for this amount of time and time the tactics in a race. It's far more like mentally grueling as you're. It's
Mhm.
like how much are you willing to suffer
Yeah,
for 2 weeks of how little sleep you're able to scrape by on, and what part of your brain comes alive at that prospect? Because I think listening to this podcast and
yeah,
even myself thinking about it is, I have a competitive drive, but to that level,
yeah.
perhaps not. So what is it going? What's whirring around in your mind when you're thinking about that kind of stuff?
I'm not sure. Maybe I've desensitized myself a little bit, but that's also the nice thing about ultra distance racing is it kind of levels the playing field between men and women. So you see a lot of women doing really well in these ultra distance races, and I feel like yes, men may be physiologically more like stronger in certain areas, but then women's mental strength kind of brings them back to a level playing field where they can compete with as equals. So it's a nice kind of sport where men and women can compete on the in the same arena basically.
So you say you've like desensitized to it. Do,
Yeah,
is that like a in a like a negative way, or you just think it's just that's just what's
I don't
happened
know.
from
I think
you
when you
continually like pushing the boundary?
when you push yourself, you kind of step up a level almost, and um, you're able to push your comfort zone a little bit more, and your comfort zone becomes a bit more willing to go that extra little bit. So, and I do enjoy the hard moments, and they're awful at the time, but then you look back and you're like, yeah, I got through that, and I pushed through that hard time.
It parallels to what we were talking about earlier with what was it? It was when you experience the extremes and the polarity of like lots of comfort, lots of discomfort, you have more of a sense of appreciation, and your
Mm.
kind of spectrum of like human experience
Yeah,
increases, because you know what's possible in terms of
yeah,
suffering, but also you know that that's you can continue to also push the boundary of where that suffering goes. And the same way, the same, us being sat both in houses with heating, with access to food in the kitchen, that becomes so much more
yeah.
of a privilege, right? Because you recognize that. So
But
I think
you just don't know,
that's obviously an
like,
interesting thing.
if you've drank a bottle of Coke midway through an ultra when you're so broken, it's never tasted so good. It's another level. Like, anything at that point.
For all the cyclists out there, imagine you've like bonked on a Sunday morning and you found the gas station for a Coke, and then just multiply that by about 100, and you've got the Coke in the middle of a transcontinental race, I suppose, in terms of that feeling.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like
and
straight
not only,
intravenous drip.
yeah, it must be awesome. I think that's also something, just generally speaking, people listening to this who aren't in the cycling world and have tuned in because they're interested in a story about riding halfway across the world, can take a
Hmm.
leaf out of that book of maybe it's not cycling, but just finding where the limit is, pushing it, and having more of an appreciation for the abundance of like comfort and privilege that we enjoy um, day to day.
When you do have comfort, it feels better. When you've experienced the discomfort.
I think that's the like mentally. I think that's like probably the biggest takeaway, isn't it?
Yeah.
From all of this, really. Um, and so we spoke about transcontinental, which is obviously like ultra endurance racing. But I noticed, I was obviously again doing some reading, that you've been involved with UCI gravel racing, which again is a step up, and something is that relatively new with the whole UCI gravel scene.
I wouldn't say I'm um too much involved with it, but I've dabbled a little
You've
bit.
done one,
Yeah.
yeah. How was that?
Well, I was cycling back from the Transcontinental, and Hutchinson tires, one of my sponsors, were actually sponsoring this event, so they got me an entry to ride this event in Catalonia, I think. So I basically detoured my route back from the Transcontinental to go via Spain to race this gravel event. So I took all my bags off my um, bike, and they took my road tires off and changed my tires to gravel tires, which were probably in need of a change after the doing the whole transcontinental, then cycling to Spain. So it's not the best lead up to a UCI gravel event. I think it was like 150k or something. So like doing a 4,000 kilometer race compared to 150k, it's not gonna be the best preparation. Um, but yeah, it was fun, and it was nice to pin a number on and um, get that bit in the bunch and racing for a bit.
The training stress score just must be huge, especially coming into a race like that. Like you're so aerobically fit, but
Yeah,
you're just like so fatigued. So it's like,
yeah.
someone snaps and goes for an effort, and it's like your breathing's fine, but was it your legs that were going
Well,
first
it's
in
just
that
a
sort of
totally
racing?
different engine. Like, I've just got no fast twitch muscle fibers left, and like, bearing in mind the shortest race that I've got this year is 200 kilometers, which is the Dirty Reaver, which is in about just over a month. And then the week after is the Tracker, which is my second shortest event, which is 350 kilometers. So it's like they're my short sprint efforts.
Yeah, it's such a huge difference between, because I know you, and I've mentioned it a couple of times in this podcast, but you've done hill climbing. You've done like the complete other end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
like literally like a 2 minute all out effort. And so
Hmm.
there's such a huge spectrum of ability there. But obviously you can't be you can be good at all round, but to try and really specialize, obviously the endurance stuff
Yeah.
is really what you're honing in on now, and really trying to dial in that, not
Hmm.
only like tolerance to sleep deprivation and huge fatigue, but also just the aerobic engine that it takes to
Hmm.
do that. It's funny hearing that 200k is the shortest race. That's
Yeah.
probably
I
one of the
might.
longest races in the UCI road calendar.
Yeah. I might do a hill climb at the end of the season, but we'll see.
You've obviously gone and done it yourself, and
Mhm.
you've been very out there and very like going for it. But people might be listening to this going, how can I get into endurance bike packing without making, like really silly mistakes?
At the end of the day, you just got to get out there and ride your bike, um, and put in the miles. But I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that they're worried about doing the 200 kilometer dirty reaver, and I was just like, it's like if you can do 100 kilometers, you can do 200. Like after that 100K mark, the rest is mental. And they were like disagreeing with me. But then I was on a ride today. I was just thinking, but for all these ultra races, I'm not doing 1,300 kilometers to train for the Atlas Mountain Race. I'm doing well, I didn't do barely any training before that. Was I had COVID at Christmas and then a chest infection. So I think a lot of ultra distance cycling is mental, and as long as you're relatively fit, you can push through some barriers. And often you'll find you'll be really struggling at a point, and then suddenly you'll get some legs and be able to push on again. And it really is a bit of a wave, and if you ride the dip of the wave, you'll get on a high point again. And just fueling correctly, basically, as long as you're fueling correctly, then um, I think you can pretty much do any distance you want.
I think that's what people struggle to understand is that, if I'm going for 100 kilometer bike ride as a novice, say like many years ago, it's not that I suddenly have all of this fitness to be able to do that and I'm some elite athlete. It's just that I fuel correctly. Like I think anyone with any small amount of fitness, if they if they fuel correctly, if they don't go too hard, if they keep it in a nice zone, it's quite easy just to tick over. And obviously that's easy for us to understand. I mean, especially you. I won't put myself in the same category as your kind of riding, but
You don't have to go
I
fast
think
either. You can just take your time and enjoy your surroundings, and um, basically just set out from your doorstep and see how far you can go. And um, we're quite lucky in the UK; you're never that far from the countryside, so um, just go somewhere new and enjoy your surroundings, and the miles will tick on. They'll look after themselves, really.
one final question with regards to like the whole endurance grit mindset sort of thing, because it's something that I've been thinking about, is that when you are in the low moments, I know it's easy to say, well, the low moments, and then you can smooth the high moments, and it's all about riding the wave. Like completely on board with that. But when you're in the low moment, because this is when many people will quit, whether it's a race or an ultra race or just their
Yeah.
own challenge that's not cycling, it's in the low moment that obviously that the doubt starts to creep in. So I'm just wondering, for the benefit of the listeners at home, where does the voice, like, what do you tell yourself when you have been in those low moments in not just racing but also just the bike packing as well?
I always find like mentally to quit and to figure out a way out of the situation is almost harder than doing another revolution on the bike. You may as well just continue pedaling, and then kind of you forget about quitting. But like I was very tempted to scratch for the Atlas Mountain Race, but it was always like as it was getting dark or in the middle of the night, and it was just like to organize getting out of this situation, getting a taxi or getting a lift out of here, it's going to be more hassle than just getting over the next pass and um, keep on pedaling. Basically, that's how I've justified it to myself in the past, and um, I've always been quite driven in the fact that I want to complete these things, and I've not been in a situation yet where I feel like there's no way out and I can't figure out a way to keep on going. But maybe that'll happen next time. You never know.
I suppose going in with that mindset is it almost becomes a self fulfilling prophecy, because if you have the positive attitude of you'll figure a way and you'll just that you're going to do it, you're more likely to have that like preconception reinforced. I guess like it's one of those weird things about psychology that if you're optimistic, it's more likely to go well, and if you're pessimistic,
Yeah,
it's more likely to go badly. It's interesting hearing that difference between the one pedal stroke is making that the easier option and
yeah,
making quitting the harder option, because I feel like that's such a huge thing with general habits and things where people always choose the easy route out, but if you can like construct your environment or like construct the situation such that the easy option is the is the quote unquote best option for you, or
Yeah.
the keeping on option, then you're
Yeah.
more likely to do it, which I find so fascinating, because it's like we find it so hard to like trust ourselves, so we have to
Yeah.
make these things so ridiculously easy to then like try and keep going.
I should probably try and
um
implement that in other areas of my life.
that's literally what I was about to say. Is how have you found that? How have you found the whole of the bike packing and just that whole space that you've been on and the journey you've been on? How has that had a ripple effect onto other areas of your life, do you think?
I suppose you're generally more healthy, but then, especially with the ultra racing, you do get injured um, a lot more. And I've been recovering from like a knee injury, and then for the last little bit. And today was the first ride that I got back and was actually able to push the pedals without having a bit of pain in my knee. So that's a step in the right direction. Yeah, I'm not really sure how it's um, done anything for the rest of my life, but yeah,
I
it's a
mean,
difficult question to
you
answer.
seem like a pretty calm and chilled out guy, so maybe that's helped with just that perspective thing and just being able just to appreciate where you're at.
Hmm.
Um, so you've mentioned a couple of things. Your future racing, 200k, 350, the smallest sort of races that you're doing, building up into this year. What are your sort of major plans for this year?
So I've just got a new job kind of thing where I'm going to be filming um, gravel events for Glorious Gravel. So I'm going to be filming a lot of their events and producing videos for them, which kind of helps with the whole making this a career thing. And then other than that, I've got a couple of gravel events, which is Dirty Reaver and then Tracker in Girona. And then I was thinking about doing Tour Divide in the in June, which is like from Banff in Canada down to Antelope Wells in New Mexico, which is like all the way along the continental divide of America. But having looked at flight prices, I don't think it will be feasible this year. It'll be quite an expensive endeavor. So that might have to be put off for a few years. And I kind of feel like if I'm going to be out there anyway, I may as well continue from New Mexico and just continue into Mexico and go all the way down to the bottom of Argentina if I'm out there anyway. I know that sounds stupid, but that's my thinking anyway. Rather than getting a flight back from Las Vegas, um, but then I'm doing a race in Spain called Badlands in the end of the year, which is like the only ultra that I've signed up for so far. Which it'll be on a gravel bike, whereas Atlas Mountain Race was on a mountain bike. So that'll be interesting, a bit more in my comfort zone. I'm not really that much of a mountain biker, so that was interesting to be on a very nice full sus mountain bike for that race. But yeah, my calendar will fill out, and I'll go on plenty of bikepacking trips, I'm sure, and be videoing them all and try and create lots of content.
Sounds fantastic, especially if you're able to make that, your living, and trying to balance that with the support from the brands and doing freelance
Mm.
work. I think
Yeah,
it's such an awesome thing to hear about, like what's possible, and with obviously you're working hard and pushing for those connections and doing more
yeah,
cool stuff to kind of fuel that. And I think, yeah, it's I'm certainly going to be sort of following along with what you get up to, and hopefully the listeners that enjoy this can either get in touch or obviously give you a follow.
yeah. Well, I
Um,
was very worried over like Christmas. It was like I'd pretty much quit my job, but like before the transcontinental, and um, I had sponsors, but I didn't really have any money coming in apart from what I was getting from YouTube, like the YouTube AdSense. So I had that, and then I was very lucky in the fact that I've got brands that are actually helping me financially now. And then having just worked out that I've got this Glorious Gravel gig doing their event, it's kind of all come together in the last month or so, and actually thinking, yeah, this is turning into a career, and I'll hopefully soon be able to have the same amount of income as I was making as a civil engineer coming out of what I'm doing in the cycling world. So once I get to that point, I'll feel like I've got a proper career, and I can then call this a success, and I've not made a mistake in dropping the civil engineering.
I mean, as with anything, there's always risk with anything.
Yeah,
I think
you've got to
the bigger
enjoy
the
it.
risk, hopefully, the bigger the potential reward.
Mhm.
Not just like monetary, but like having the life that you choose rather than the life that's given to you, I suppose. Um, I mean, and throughout this story, it's been evident that on the surface, it's very risky to go out and do a big trip.
Mhm.
In theory, apprehension and stuff, but you've been able to take that one step at a time, and because you've put yourself in risk, the rewards, quote unquote, have downstream sort of all played out. And so it's inspiring not only as a bike packing and the mentality, but also just the willingness to, drop civil engineering and throw you all into this. I think it's very admirable, and I think people could definitely take a leaf out of your a page in your book. Um,
Maybe
I
don't
want
just
to
like your careers, just go a
yeah.
little.
Yeah, it's definitely with caveats.
Yeah,
One leaf in a page, not the whole book. Taking the sort of extracting what you've done and like taking like the general tips and mindsets and then applying it to the context of where someone's at is obviously going to be hopefully be useful for their life. And I want to finish the podcast by asking you, because it'd be silly of me not to ask, considering you've done it so much and you'd probably an expert. You've done it to a level where you've got so much experience under your belt. So if someone listening to this is like particularly inspired by the story and they want to dabble into bike packing and adventure riding and that whole space, what are like the top tips that you would have in terms of like equipment and gear and like route planning and stuff like that?
I'd say first look at what you've got, and you'd be surprised at how little you actually need to go on your first initial adventure. Um, yeah, just start small, and a micro adventure is still an adventure, and just set off from your doorstep and try it out. You might like it. You don't want to organize a full 4 month journey across the planet and then figure out, oh, I don't actually like sleeping in a ditch, and I don't want to be slumming it that much. And maybe it's more in your cup of tea to be go from cycle from hotel to hotel, and maybe this means you can't go for as long, but your money won't stretch, but you'll have more of an enjoyable time. Um, so don't go out spending all your money straight away. Make sure you like it, and um, do stuff locally in your local area first. And um, yeah, and you could be surprised how far you can get from your doorstep. You could go all the way around the world, just from setting off with a bicycle from your front door, or even just like running. Like I met, so like Rosie Swale Pope, I've met her several times now, and I first met her coming through Turkey, I think. Oh no, it's in Bulgaria, and she was running from London to Kathmandu. So there's plenty of crazy people out there like her and me, and people doing these amazing things. But yeah, just start locally and build from there.
One final thing, thinking about the long term, what's one thing that you really want to do that you haven't done, and what's your like long term vision, or are you just trying to take it one step at a time?
Tour Divide is one of them, and then I'd quite like to cycle from the top of Alaska to the bottom of Argentina, which is kind of a bit longer than Shanghai to Newcastle. But I think that's a one to do in a couple of years, maybe. But we'll see. I want to see how this videoing stuff goes, and maybe I'll make a big video of that at some point. But yeah, that's
Look
like kind
forward
of
to it.
like way off in the future, and um,
Yeah.
seems like a pretty long trip. And I wouldn't want to rush it either. I wouldn't want to be racing that one. I'd want to enjoy it and visit different places, and um, yeah, I'd want to take my time in kind of. I'll also want to push it a little bit, because it's not fun if you're not gritting your teeth a little bit.
So it's all finding that balance, isn't it? But
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I found this conversation so interesting. Like it's so nice to hear such a positive view of cycling and the things that it can do, not just in terms of like local bike racing or transport,
Mm.
commute to work, but also being able to expand your horizons and your worldview. And you know, people hopefully off the back of listening to this will go and check out the huge video that you've done, and it just captures that huge appreciation for the world and for culture and for differing landscapes and beauty and nature. And I think nothing can do it just like the bike can with stuff like that. And that's been my own experience as well, doing sort of like miniature trips, and it's something that you're inspiring me to sort of potentially go back into. So
Yeah,
I
but
hope that.
with the bike, you get to go from one place to another under your own steam, and you're seeing every little village in between these places. Whereas if you're going in a bus or a plane, you're going from one major city to another major city, and you're not seeing what's in between. So you're not seeing all the country, and you're not feeling it. You're not feeling the elevation. You're not really experiencing country. I don't think in the same way as you do on a bicycle.
So yeah, 10 out of 10 points for the bike in terms of a mode of transport, and hopefully people can take that away from this. But I think we'll wrap up. I think this has been a really fascinating conversation. I thank you again for your time,
No
and thanks
worries. Thanks
everyone
for
for
having me.
listening.